Speaker.
Member for Dunkley.
Last year, the member for Gippsland and I were privileged to represent this parliament at the annual proceedings of the United Nations General Assembly in New York. It really is, I think it's fair to say, one of the more extraordinary delegations, one of the more extraordinary opportunities that a member of this parliament has an opportunity to be part of. And he will provide his own report, but I know I can say on behalf of both of us that we are incredibly grateful to have been able to have that opportunity and to play a part in representing Australia at the United Nations. It's worth remembering, and Australia's Foreign Minister Penny Wong noted this in her country statement to High Level Week when we were there, that Australia is one of the founding members of the United Nations. And in fact, our country played a prominent role in the negotiation of the UN Charter in 1945, and for which we owe a debt to Doc Evatt for his role in that as the head of Australia's delegation, and William Hodgson, who was the Australian ambassador. We were one of 8 nations involved in drafting the Universal Declaration of Human Rights. Australia has a really proud history of an involvement well above our population, well above what some might think is our status internationally at the United Nations. And it's that involvement which actually means that our international status traditionally has been regarded as one of the important countries in multilateral actions and treaties, despite where we are at the bottom of the globe or the top of the globe, depending on where we are in the rotation, and the population of our country. So it was with honour that the first thing as the delegation we got to do was to participate in High Level Week, which is a very UN-named week, where Prime Ministers, Presidents, Foreign Ministers, high-level representatives of every member country made a statement on behalf of their country. The member for Gippsland and I got to play a small part, but we think an incredibly important part, in the government's agenda to step up Australia's engagement with our Pacific neighbours and ASEAN neighbours and friends during that time. We did meet and get photographs with and shake hands with Prime Ministers, Presidents, Foreign Ministers from countries in the Pacific island areas and ASEAN, so much so that the member for Gippsland and I may have started to referring to that week as Peter and Darren's excellent adventure across the Pacific Islands and ASEAN. But it was a pleasure, it was a privilege to think of being there on the floor of the General Assembly, talking to our friends from other countries on behalf of Australia and reiterating Australia's commitment to a number of really important policies for us and for our neighbours, not the least of which was climate change, and also being there with Pat Dodson, Senator Pat Dodson, and talking about recognition of Indigenous Australians and the important role that that sort of recognition is playing in countries around the world. For me, the highlight of High Level Week, of course, was being there when our Foreign Minister Penny Wong gave Australia's address. And if anyone hasn't had the opportunity to read that or see that, I recommend it, because it shows how important Australia's engagement with the rest of the world is. I won't take up too much of the Chamber's time. I do want to talk about some of the highlights, but I want to thank Australia's Ambassador to the UN, Mitch Fifield, for his hospitality. Australia's then Consul-General to New York, Nick Greiner, for the educative and enjoyable trip that he took the member for Gippsland and his wife and myself and my husband on to West Point. And it's actually quite disappointing now that when Darren Chester and I walk into a room, we don't get greeted the way we got greeted by the cadets at West Point, which will never happen again. It was quite amazing. Alex Volkov at the mission had the unenviable task of coordinating the member for Gippsland and myself and our activities. I wanted to thank Uni Kim, who did Australia's representation at the Third Committee, a lot of human rights work, and I did work with her and had the privilege and the opportunity to present Australia's statement on protecting children from sexual exploitation, particularly online, and on the promotion and protection of the right to freedom of opinion and expression. And being involved in the work of the Third Committee, again, just emphasised some of the commonalities around the world of the issues that we face and how we don't need to think in Australia that we can solve them on our own. We are part of a world and a United Nations where we're working towards predominantly the same thing. And I wanted to give a special acknowledgement to Millie Allen, who chaired on behalf of Australia with Costa Rica the renegotiation of the motion on a moratorium on executions with a view to establishing, abolishing the death penalty. She did an amazing job in the face of some pretty tough negotiating tactics from countries that wanted to and are keeping the death penalty. But ultimately, on the 15th anniversary, since that motion was first adopted by the United Nations, the General Assembly re-adopted the resolution with a historic majority of 2/3. Australia can be very proud of Millie and everyone who worked on that. Also wanted to thank everyone at the Australian Embassy in Washington, where the member for Gippsland and I had 3 or 4 days where the member for Gippsland accompanied me to think tanks focusing on things like women's equality at work, and I accompanied the member for Gippsland to meetings about improving the lives of veterans. And I think we both learnt more about the topics that we had been working on, and we also learnt more about each other's interests in an incredibly beneficial way by doing that together. It was a whirlwind lead up to both of us going to New York, which was no one's fault. COVID, an election in May, various other things. But one thing I did notice was that a lack of us as parliamentarians, DFAT, Parliamentary Travel Office and the mission in New York being able to prepare for us being there, I think meant that perhaps we didn't get quite the involvement that we otherwise could have, and the mission didn't perhaps get quite the use out of us that they otherwise could have. So I wanted to encourage whoever it is that gets the opportunity to go this year, that decision to be made as early as possible and for preparatory work to be done to enhance opportunities, because we had extraordinary opportunities, but I think there are more. We were there at a time when the Security Council and the General Assembly were debating the issue of Russia and the Ukraine, which was an extraordinary time to be there, to see how that body was dealing with an illegal and unwarranted war. And we were there at a time when a lot of the debate in a lot of the committees focused on why we aren't hitting the targets for the Sustainable Development Goals, particularly climate change, and how that is impacting the most vulnerable people and communities around the world the most, and what as a world we can do about it. They are just some of the themes that we were able to learn about and be part of over there, and it's an invaluable experience, and I'm sure the member for Gippsland and I will bring back some of the things that we learnt and saw to contribute to this parliament and to our communities. I know I already have. I just wanted to finish, because I did say I would be brief, but I never am, by thanking the member for Gippsland, Darren Chester, and his unarguably better half, Julie, for their friendship. We knew each other a little bit, Darren and I, before we went, but over the time that we were there, Darren and Julie became good friends, I believe, to myself and my husband Rod. They were very generous to cook us a meal once a week to make sure that we had a home-cooked meal. The way they looked after the younger staff at the mission and took them under their wing was incredible to watch. I think it was because Julie missed her own children, I'm sure it was, but it was also because they are two people who cared about the welfare of young Australians in New York working for the Australian government, and it was an immense credit to them, the way they looked after the young employees. I'm very grateful to have had those two as our travel companions and to have the member for Gippsland as the person I went to events and worked with at the United Nations. It enriched mine and my husband Rod Glover's time over there, and I learnt a lot from them. And finally, to Fiona Webster, the Deputy Chief of Mission, thank you for your support over there, for your hospitality for us, and for the message that I have yet to respond to, noting that you and your husband finally knocked off the rest of that bottle of gin that I left you with at the last dinner before we came home. Thank you to the Parliament again for that opportunity, and good luck to whoever the two lucky people are that get to go this year.
Thank you, and I